Ladies and gentlemen, guess what day it is? It is Wednesday. It is January 26, 2011, and this is Day 9 Daily number 248, where we learn to be a better gamer. In today's daily, I was about to be on the sickest roll of life. I don't know if the real world has like achievements or checkpoints, but let's just say I didn't even need a checkpoint or a save spot today because I was perfect every single step of the way. Seriously, 1 p.m. meeting, entered my room at 1 p.m. Bam! Immediately got into the meeting. Oh my gosh, and I said, 1 second, let me go get my coffee. The coffee was still percolating, but the last 2 drips, drip, drip, drip. It's right when I pulled out the coffee pot and no drips fell onto the heater underneath. It was perfect timing. The water immediately ran out. And I was like, I am the shit at getting myself some coffee. I was so on the money. I couldn't believe it. Everything. Even like my socks. I put it on and I didn't even have to like rotate the sock to get the right orientation. I did it right the first time. It was a perfect day. And then I showed up, I'm ready to start the daily, and I'm like, ladies and gentlemen, I'm like putting my nice voice on, the deep, burly man voice. We call that the sauce. I was using the sauce, I was so confident. Ladies and gentlemen, we will be going live in 5. Oh shit, I don't have any hard drive space. Oh, I don't have any hard drive space, and I had to sit there and copy it, and it was like 4 minutes remaining, and I came back 5 minutes later, and there were 4 minutes remaining. I wanted to just grab a cute animal and squeeze it until it died. I was really upset. But I made it. We transferred it. We're going to do the daily. Everything's fine. With one exception. Everything's fine with one exception. If you would be so kind as to go to shortyawards.com and vote for me. I'm only 400 votes behind first place. I want to win. I want to win so bad. Starcraft community, tell everyone you know. Tell everyone you know, including the cute animals that I would never actually hurt because I love animals. If you go to shortyawards.com, go to gaming, and vote for Day 9 TV. And also follow me on Twitter, twitter.com/Day9TV, because the whole voting system uses Twitter. In exciting news, I think there's maybe one more announcement I want to make. Fun Day Monday, we'll be doing the announcement for that little style afterwards. I really wanted to jump directly into the daily to help subside my immense rage at the fact that I didn't copy over those dailies. I hate running out of hard drive space. So, let us divine. Once upon a time, there was a player by the name of White Raw who changed his name to Duckload Raw, and everyone laughed and laughed. White Raw is a player who, I'm going to call him White Raw because it's not a tournament. I don't actually have to, be right. It's what I want to call him because I've known him as that for like 7 years. But White Raw came to early prominence in the beta because of 2 reasons. First of all, he has a good RTS mind, and he is a good mass gamer. He plays lots and lots and lots of games, known for using wide varieties of style, both in his practice and in his tournament play. So he immediately spiked up hard and had some amazing performances in some beta tournaments, but then he went and got himself a wife. Ugh, how uncool, because all of us are like still adolescent teenagers. I'm 24 and I'm still totally a teenager. Girls, cooties. Right? So he did the whole wife thing, and that's great. And his play dipped a little bit, I think, because like he got married and went on a honeymoon, which, don't coincide well with sitting on Battle.net 2.0 for 13 hours a day. And his tournament performance dipped, and a lot of people made the immediate conclusion of, White Raw just spiked up in the early days of beta, but now that people know the game better, White Raw has somehow fallen behind, and people love to do he got married, or it's the fact that he's like 30 or 31. People love to think of these sort of arbitrary, silly excuses. However, White Raw practiced and practiced and practiced and practiced and became the sickest, beastly player and won like 3 tournaments last week, netting like over 4,000 euros, which is like 20 billion American dollars because our currency is doing horribly. He made a lot of money by doing sick runs, like crushing top players like Sen. I'm even struggling to remember some of them, which is silly because I casted the games. He's just been doing an amazingly, amazingly impressive job. And in particular, I wanted to show his Protoss vs. Terran style that seems very, very solid, and I wanted to talk about how to crack it. So let's go ahead and take a look at the Protoss vs. Terran style to which I refer. So we're going to take the IEM games of White Raw, This is one of the games of his series against De Muslim. Here's Duckload spawning here at the right position. We're actually going to be looking at 4 games today. Oh my goodness, I prepare so much. De Muslim's going to be in the north position here. Now, I am going to first just say, what do Protosses normally do? In this matchup, what do Protosses normally do? What do Protosses normally do? What do Protosses normally do? I want you to think what your answer to that question would be. What do Protosses normally do? Normally, ordinarily, typically, usually, what would you end up seeing? I would say something like the big Colossus ball. The gateway unit plus Colossus. That is the thing that really sticks out in my mind. Yeah, you see players do like a double +1 upgrade, and yeah, OGS MC does all his immortal DT Templar stuff. But when I think traditional PvT, I think big Colossus gateway counts. I was noticing, though, in watching a lot of games of White Raw, and here's your homework. Here's your homework that I want you to do after this daily. I want you to get a whole bunch of White Raw Protoss vs. Terrans, and you will see the following look. Early on, he stays relatively low on gateways, but begins getting Colossus early on. You'll see him have 3 gateways, and 1 robotics facility getting Colossus. Very specific look. And then, as time goes on, you'll see him flood with more gateways. He won't get additional robotics facilities for an even bigger Colossus count. He instead will get 6 or 7 gateways, begin getting Zealot leg speed and a +1 attack upgrade, and flood a lot of Zealots. So again, I want you to think of these 2 components. Low gateways and getting Colossus early, into high gateway count, lots of Zealots, lots of +1 upgrades on the attack, and continuing to make Colossi. Now that is pretty typical of most players now. Most players are doing the start getting Colossus fast, start getting the gateways later on. So let's go ahead and look at that. I'm not going to analyze where it's weak. I'm not going to analyze too much this game. This game is going to be an example of sort of the what. This is going to be our establishing base point. Because this is something that happens to me as I end up casting a lot of tournaments or just browsing a lot of replays. It's fun to just sort of identify patterns. I mean, if you are a human being, you will naturally be identifying tons and tons of patterns. So this is always a good little bit of fun. So we see the observers coming out. We see some gateways going down. Duckload is getting his robotics bay quite quickly, actually a little surprisingly quickly, as he really won't be able to support that for too long, but he did end up canceling the Robo, and he's going to go ahead and get his Nexus right now. It looks like he's scouting in here, sees some junk. I'm not going to worry so much about that. What I want to emphasize to you is a general thing that you'll see, which is rearrangement. Most of the time you see White Raw do a low gateway count with Colossus, and then do a lot of Zealots and upgrades in Templar. Eventually he has a huge Colossus force and a whole bunch of Zealots and Templar. That's where he eventually gets. Sometimes the order will be swapped. Sometimes, but still, it's important to note those 2 big components. So for instance, in this game, Duckload saw, oh my gosh, Banshees are coming. Why are you getting Colossi against Banshees? Okay, well, he's just not going to do that. He's instead going to get Templar, play a little bit turtly. But I still want you to note, again, in terms of the what of his style, he has this Twilight Council in his forge. We see him getting some more gateways. We see some more prisms. Ignore all that. Let's just look at the production tab. We're going to end up looking at it. Again, we're going to be doing this sort of what look. Hey, look, there's the robotics bay going down. Here's our plus speed. Here is our +1 attack upgrade. Here is the huge flood of gateways. See all those gateways popping out right now? 6, 7 gateways. Pretty typical stuff. Ooh, he's even getting more gateways. Looks like he's going to have 8 total. Look, all the Chrono Boost being spent on the Colossus. He is getting a +2 attack, and this is the general look that makes him very intimidating, is this big Zealot count. I mean, even if we look up here at the production, let's just speed things up a little bit. We're going to see like more Zealots get flooded out here. Yep, you see there's a lot of Zealots coming out. And here is the very scary mix, is that he just has a couple of Colossi, and watch as he just blasts this apart. This is just not that close. There's even a pretty famous game that White Raw played against Druby not long ago on Jungle Basin, where White Raw was kind of screwed, but eventually just sort of went back to this look. He went back to this look. And as we're going to see, literally in the next 2 seconds, White Raw is going to be defending. And then he's going to move in, and yeah, that's pretty darn hard to do. Again, not huge numbers of Colossi, not like 2 robotics facilities worth of Colossi. Instead, it's just 1 robo just slowly churning out Colossi. A lot of gateways and a lot of the associated gateway upgrades, but those Colossi are more of a support unit instead of the whole point of the frickin' army to begin with, right? But I want to note something really fast here. I want to go to the Muslim's cam, because now that I have done the what of this game, now I've done the what, we have identified the sort of style of White Ra, the sort of emphasis on Colossi for support. I want you to kind of follow with me in terms of the mini-map of how the Muslim is doing in terms of putting pressure back on his opponent. And how he ends up dealing with this. We've got to go through this quite quickly. We have to go through it quite quickly altogether. And we're going to see one more example between the Muslim and White Ra as to why this is strong. Alright, we're going to look at, again, we're all talking about the strength of White Ra's play in this game, identifying what it is and its strength. Okay, the Muslim did some scouting. We even see some ravens popping out. He's going to do a little harassment. Oh, he sees that there's no Colossus den, so not actually that much pressure being put on by the Muslim. A little bit of a late command center going down, as we can see, already finished expansion. But let's go ahead and go back to the Muslim camp. Sort of hanging out. Look at the minimap. Just look at the minimap. Nothing really coming out too much. Nothing really coming out. A little uncharacteristic of the Muslim, as he is quite aggressive. But oops, looks like there was a warp prism there. So the Muslim kind of feeling like, ooh, I maybe play a little more carefully. Oh, wow, there's actually some stuff warping in there. Oh, there's a little bit of harassment here. Oh, how obnoxious. Now, you'll notice in the first playthrough, I didn't look at those. I did not look at the harassment stuff. I want people to think more about when buildings go down, as opposed to when fancy unit mixes move out to attack. Sure, there's harassment going on, but I want you to think a lot of Colossus, and eventually, starting to get the Colossus, and eventually a lot of Zealots with speed, right? That's what I want you to be thinking about. That's what I want you to be thinking about. And also at the same time, look at how the Muslim is really not putting pressure back on his opponent. And the resource counter, look at them. They're about the same in terms of food. About the same in terms of food. But look, here's that attack, right? Here's that attack that happened. And somehow, wow, it looks like almost no damage was really dealt here. Oh, how tragic. You see the Muslim trying to do some micro, but a couple of storms. Hell, White Ra even stormed his own Zealots. It was just a little bit hard to deal with, right? And after a game like this, it's very easy to be a Terran player and say, oh my gosh, how the hell do I deal with that? I mean, if you think about the way that this build played out, the Muslim kind of got to build the things that he wanted to. He got harassed a little bit, but, I mean, he didn't get absolutely obliterated by any sort of drops. He started getting upgrades in time. He did good scouting. He had a good sense of what his opponent was doing. It can feel very, 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 very intimidating. But what I am going to argue, and what I'm going to argue for the rest of this entire set of games, is that the biggest issue with heavy early Colossus play is that you lack mobility. You cannot be in a lot of places at once. The Colossus ball itself, that is this is hard to break. This is hard as hell to break. This is so tough. This is so darn hard to deal with. However, I'm not going to try to say, here's the units that you make to kill that. I'm going to talk about, here's how you abuse how immobile this force is. Here's how you abuse how immobile this force is. So let's take a look at another game. Here is a game between Zhou and Duckload, aka White Ra, because I'm just not going to call him Duckload, alright? His name is not frickin' Duckload. So here's Zhou. He's spawning in this bottom left corner. And we're going to see Zhou do stuff that is not all that entirely different from the way the Muslim played in that last game. The Muslim got a relatively late expansion, was doing a lot of early barrack stuff, was doing a lot of poking around and all that good jazz. Now first, let's watch Duckload and do a little bit of our favorite thing, the what. What is he doing? He's going to be going for somewhat of a fast Colossus. We're going to see absolutely stunning play by Zhou this game. Absolutely Stunning, stunning, stunning play. And I know a lot of you are having a lot of trouble against this sort of Colossus-heavy play. In fact, I think that there were statistics released that showed that, especially at the lowest levels of play, Protoss versus Terran is way skewed towards the Protoss half. It's really hard for weaker Terrans to beat weaker Protosses. And again, that is because people are a little too passive, a little bit too passive. It's very easy in your sort of upbringing and your learning experience to say to yourself, yeah, I want to be getting the right units, and then I want to attack. And you kind of think of it as one attack at a time. I want you to be using that mobility a little bit more, using that mobility, not doing anything in too much of a direct fashion. We're seeing Zhou do one of those typical Zhou-like builds where he has a factory pretty early and makes Hellions. That's a very Zhou-ly thing. We see that happen in a lot of his games. Oh, again, always fun to identify patterns. So here, hey, we have our gateway coming out early, our obs, 2 gateway and 1 robo. The most fundamental standard opening in the book because of the fact that it lets us get a good set of defense. And there's the Robotics Bay. This will actually not get canceled this game. We have the Immortal coming out for defense and also to knock down these rocks. But hey, Colossus coming out fast. No expansion yet for Zhou. None at all. No expansion. 0 expansion. Very similar to what Muslim did last game. The reason I want to highlight that is it's very easy to have a game where one player doesn't expand and then loses to a bigger force. And then a game where a player does expand and has a lot more units because he expanded early, obviously. And you can't really conclude very much from that. But here we're seeing the Muslim in that game didn't really use a second base for a while. In this game, Zhou is not really going to use a second base for a while. They're essentially paired up with about the approximately same amount of resources. Now watch this. Watch what ends up happening. Here is the usual play from Protosses. I despise this play, to be honest. I really hate early Colossi. But we're seeing the early Colossus come out. The logic is my force plus my little Colossus dude coming out is so strong that Terran will not be able to break me. Here comes an example of abusing mobility. Abusing mobility. Now, we see a drop that's coming right now. Hey, a command center coming down. Not a fast command center, and eventually command center. Hell, we're at 8 minutes and 30 seconds. You can have, like, expos up by, like, 5 minutes. But we're not seeing that. Now, a lot of times when people do a move like this, when they do this sort of play, let me talk about all the different ways that this can go wrong, this sort of play. All the wrong ways to think about this, right? All the wrong ways to think about this. First of all, the first wrong way to think about this is to think of it as is to think of it too rigidly. To think of it as, it's 8 minutes and 45 seconds, time for my medevac drop. What I just do is the medevac drop. You want to be trying to regularly find holes with the medevac drop. Because if you're regularly trying to find ways to abuse your medevac, that is another way of saying, I am trying to use my mobility to my advantage. I'm actually trying to think in terms of, I am a mobile force. How do I use this mobility? If you just say, I'm dropping at 8 minutes and 45 seconds, you're just kind of following a rote, predictable set of patterns without thinking. And that's what's fun about abusing your mobility, is it allows you to think really well. So that's the first big misstep. People just say, oh yeah, just sort of do it. And they'll do it once or twice at clearly defined times instead of making it a regular thing. The second big mistake that people will make is they'll obviously do the good logic of saying a drop at the back and an attack at the front is a good thing. And they will be convinced that they need to do mega damage, that they need to get in there and they need to kill off every probe, and that they need to either break the front and kill them that way, and that this is somehow supposed to win the game. This is not a game-winning move. It's very much so like in a fighting game, what we would call chipping damage. We just want to just get a little bit of disadvantage for White Raw. And that's great. That's exactly what we want to do. So what we're going to see, we're going to slow this down. I want this to be such an amazing example to all of you of how exactly you want to be controlling this. Look, it just pokes a little. Here comes a medevac at the front, a medevac so we can see up onto the high ground. And look at this, pulls right back to the backside. Now just look at the units. 15 Marines, 4 Marauders, 3 Hellions. Colossus, 1 Immortal, 5 Zealots, Stalkers, Sentry. Protoss will win in a straight-up fight. I can just tell you right now, a well-controlled Protoss will win in a straight-up fight here. But look at what Zhou ends up doing. Here's a little stim. He's going to end up poking a little bit here. Look at that. Does a little bit of damage. He's lost one heli and one marine. He's target firing that. And then look at what he's going to do. He's just going to pull back. And this cute little medevac is going to end up swinging around to this backside. 2 units got picked off. Doesn't feel like a huge win. Not an enormous feeling type victory. But look at that. Moving over here again. Oh, look, we see that Duckload is kind of having a little bit of a hectic time. He's needing to pull left and right and back. And again, these Colossi are not good by themselves. Colossi need to stick together. An army that is a packed tight ball of Colossus plus other junk is great. Split up Colossi are no good. So look at this. Zhou is getting this very safe expansion out. He does not have an extremely high amount of unit production. He only has 2 barracks. He doesn't have that many units on the low ground. But he is abusing his mobility to drop here. Look at these Hellions and Marauders in there. That's a great little mix of guys. It can be very threatening to both buildings. Oh, look at that. And then pulling back again. White Rot is pinned, as we would say. He is pinned back to his base. Very, very good to do pins in SC2. Very, very cool stuff. So wasn't that a lovely example? Wasn't that lovely? Was anything key killed off? No gateways were killed off. No nexuses were killed off. Not a lot of probes were killed off. Those are the big things that you want to be killing. But Zhou killed something. He killed, a Marauder and a Sentry. He killed some pylons. And most importantly, he killed White Ra's ability to ever move out, ever, for that period of time. No way White Ra could move out at all. Zero method for White Ra to move out. As usual, see, low gateway count, 1 robo. This is the usual White Ra that we know and love, right? This is the same look. We're eventually going to see him get a lot of gateways. We're eventually going to see him get Zealot with leg speed. We're eventually going to see him get that +1, exactly as we were saying beforehand. But look at Zhou. He's keeping this little medevac here, just hanging out by the corner. And where's the rest of Zhou's army? It's pretty damn far forward. It's not turtling back here. Starting to get some more barracks up, but still not a huge amount of unit-producing structures. Just now beginning to get those up. It is mobility that we are seeing our Terran buddy Zhou abuse. And look at this. Look at these Colossi. What an awkward spot for your Colossi to be. These Colossi are declaring, I will never be able to attack my opponent no matter what. Now, White Ra, being the very clever advanced player he is, begun doing Warp Prism Harass because he's mentally thinking, yeah, I really can't move out. I'm pinned, so I have to be able to do some harassment and some damage. And here, for a moment, we see that our Terran buddy Zhou has to pull back. The instant Zhou is stopping pressure on Duckload, we see Duckload move out. That is what is the brilliance of this Warp Prism from Duckload's point of view. But again, Zhou is still abusing this mobility. Big chunk of armies being left back there. Zhou ends up defending. He will end up landing. He'll be fine. He's using these Vikings to sort of spread out and pick off wide areas of terrain. And he will eventually end up picking off this Warp Prism. And again, we're going to see some amazing stuff happen here. Look at this little bit of the mini-map. Here comes the Warp Prism. Actually, does he have that speed upgrade? No, he doesn't end up having the speed upgrade. Warp Prisms are just fast anyways, especially when you're at ×2. Look at this. The instant Zhou spots it, time to move out. No more reason not to abuse our mobility again. Moving right on out. Duckload ordinarily could use this army. Ordinarily could use this army that I'm boxing. Imagine this all as one packed tight cluster. Could use this to kind of crush this, right? To kind of crush this. However, all this army has to stay back because there's one freaking medevac here continuing to do damage. We even heard some Colossi doing a little bit of damage there. And now Zhou gets to walk all the way over to his opponent. As usual, we see Duckload getting to do the overall things that he does. Yep, look, here comes the leg speed. Here's the Forge finishing up for the +1. But Zhou, look, is continuing. He's going to poke. He's just going to poke, and he's going to pull right back. And he's going to poke here. He's going to poke here, and he is willing to pull right back out again. Just keeping this army pinned. And in the meantime, oh my goodness, an expansion going down for Zhou. Look at the resource counter. Zhou is actually pulling farther and farther ahead of Duckload. Duckload is under quite an immense amount of pressure. Whoa! Those minerals are now mining themselves out. This is not really an aspect of the map. This is just very good harass. We're even going to see another example of this directly after this game. Yeah, sure, more harass going on, but Zhou is doing a relatively good job of repelling it. So what are we going to see after all that chipping and getting up into the good position? And of course, every map has a relatively good position. But I want you to note that up until this point, there's been no direct engagement by Terran. None. He's been poking and prodding and running things up to the front and pulling back and just scooting around the edges and making sure Protoss feels all kind of and kind of having to hold him. And this is the first direct conflict. We did not see Zhou suicide a bunch of things in. So many players will watch this and be like, I must drop, and then they'll drop and lose everything in the drop. And they'll be like, cool, I must do another drop. And what they're doing is just shedding money. They're just hemorrhaging resources, right? You don't want to be doing that. So in our first direct confrontation, amazing storms. Honestly, Duckload does have a slightly superior army mix, but because Zhou has been poking and prodding and getting his macro up, we see that Duckload is in a far weakened position. This is really a very artful way to have dealt with this style of play of Protoss. The Colossus, again, is a unit that forces you to be pinned back. All of your gateway units must be next to your Colossi. If your Colossi and your gateway units get split up, everything is very, very weak for Protoss. So it's a tough situation to be in when you are a Protoss player who's under a lot of harassment. If you're a Protoss player who's being left alone, you get to build up your nice little army, and then you just shove it all in like a stack of poker chips, and they will end up losing virtually every time. There's some great transitions that we've been seeing out of Korean players who get 2 reactors early on to make a lot of Marines, so that way they can get 2 starports making double Vikings. That's great, all right? That's a good way to get the correct composition against Colossi, but I'm not trying to argue what the correct composition against the Colossus is. I'm trying to show how you can do the poking and prodding and all the good stuff with medevacs and running forces around at the front of the Protoss base to split his army up and to make aggression never be an issue throughout the entire game. Very, 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 very important thing to note. It's not the units that we're ending up abusing. It is our mobility abusing his immobility. Now, while this game starts, I want to give an exaggerated example. For any of you who are still feeling a little unsure of what I mean by this mobility versus non-mobility, let's imagine 50 sieged tanks, and I'm Zerg. How do I break that? I could go into my composition thought process and say, yeah, well, you're going to need some Broodlords and predominantly Zerglings, and Banelings are going to be relatively good if there's a good cluster, but likely will be supported by Planetary Fortresses and Vikings, so you have to have some Corruptors in that mix, and it's all thinking, how do I kill tanks? How do I kill tanks? How do I kill tanks? But the player who's thinking in a mobility mindset will say, tanks can't move, and there's 50 of them right there that can't move. I guess I'll just Nidus Worm the back of his main. And then you Nidus Worm, the tanks are like, oh my... And they try to get back to the base, and they can't. And then the instant they get back there and siege up and kill off your force, you've Nidus Wormed at the other half of the screen. Oh, how amazing it is to abuse mobility. Jinro versus Marine King Prime. Marine King Prime, huge amounts of Marines Marauders, will never be as strong as a huge clustered tank force. But Marine King Prime just kept hitting Jinro where the tanks weren't, and Jinro eventually had a very, very, very hard time dealing with it. Mobility. Let's look at this game again. Let's also begin identifying that look of Duckload, because I want you to be able to see the look of early Colossus low on gateway count. The early look, right? The early look. So then you can begin setting up a good abuse. Here is Zhou doing his usual double barracks factory opening. Very unique, and I think it will, of course, be quite popular after seeing the way that Zhou dismantled our Protoss buddy in this series. There's the second assimilator going down. Cool! The safest opening in the book. 2 gateway, 1 robo. Alright, cool. Zhou doing a little bit of pressure early on. That's fine. I don't care. I don't really care too much about this. This doesn't excite me. This is a fun thing that I'm sure Zhou has studied and determined to be of strong play. Kind of funny that those 2 Marines die. Bunker gets canceled. Alright, cool. And I want you to again begin to notice how this look from White Rock comes out. Whoa, a Warp Prism drop. What's he going to do with that? It looks like, oh, there's the Warp Prism, and he's loading everything up into it. Oh! The casual observer will say, hey, in that last game on Delta Quadrant, we saw a completely different thing. We saw a really fast Colossus. In this game, again, completely different thing. Fast Warp Prism. But again, I want you to think about these two components. Low Warp Gate count and getting Colossus fast. And then a lot of gateways and our Zealot with +1 and speed. Those are the two things I want you to always be able to identify. Things tend to converge a little more often than you would initially think. Here comes some harassment. We have a pretty cool force field that gets thrown down. It's a little bit off, but continuing to warp things in. We have a third gateway coming down by Duckload. Oh, pressure going on at the front. Whoops, Joe ends up barely defending, thanks to some pretty cool Hellion stuff. We do have a more one-base-ish play coming up, but hey, you know what? Low gateway count and a relatively fast robo. There's an expansion coming up. You know what? This is basically the same thing that we saw last game. Basically the same thing that we saw last game. Sure, the Warp Prism was a little bit more aggressive this game, and it even brought in the Immortal, but it's basically the same thing. I want you to think in terms of broad strokes. Too often people think in terms of the opening. It's like, oh, he went gateway, gateway, robo, and last game he went gateway, robo, gateway. I guess I need two completely different deviations based upon those two completely different openings. You know what? He gets two gateways in a robo in both circumstances, so just call it shit that has two gateway in a robo. And I will just have a style that I play against that little box of shit. That's the correct way to think. So here we see that this is an overall look to Duckload. And he's going to be moving in here with some more harassment, doing a little bit more poking. So we end up seeing a medevac drop. Now, medevac drops are generally pretty effective. He has not seen that there is this this Robobe coming down. In general, though, the medevac drops are effective if you have Hellions or if you have a lot of Marauders to be able to pick off these Stalkers. But let's sort of see what ends up happening with Zhou. He's doing kind of a long one base. Wow, that's actually an extremely late command center. In the last game, the command center was going down to 8 minutes and 30 seconds. In this game, it's going down to 10 minutes and 30 seconds. That's at a very, very, very late gateway. Or, very, very, very late command center. As usual, we see the starport swap. Getting some of those good units. Right? Getting the right units against our Colossus. We're seeing Duckload do the usual thing. Low gateway count. And one robotics facility chrono boosting out a lot of them Colossi. Great, great. We do see some drops happening right now. Obviously, this is a little bit of help, but look, pulls right on out. Just wants to avoid losing too much. And there we end up seeing, oh, hey, cool, look, a little bit more aggression. Obviously, cannot really engage the Colossi. But Colossi are so immobile that even doing drops in two bases that are right next to each other can end up being very, very effective. And look, there it is, it pulls away. Other medevac here. Yeah, and we do see Duckload. I'm going to try to do some more Warp Prism stuff and ends up getting shut down. And I want you to look at this little tiny force. This is not a big force. Oh, the drop ends up getting picked a little bit. Looks like this medevac might barely. Uh-oh. No, hey, no problem. I'm going to go ahead and attack somewhere else. Normally, you'd want to do something like put a medevac here. And then when all the Stalkers and Sentries sort of move up, then you bust down the front door. However, if he brings two of his Colossi all the hell way down here, then yeah, go ahead and go for the front. Look at this. Stim running up. He's going to pick off. He sees anything that might be threatening and just pops right back. And then hits this back door again. How absolutely amazing. And we're seeing Zhou pull ahead in the food count in a substantial way. And look, Duckload decides, oh, well, let me try to push back that little force. Oh, wait, crap. No, I got to actually move down here. These Hellions are doing a very, very good job. Very, very good job. Okay, it looks like we have some more Marauders popping out. Good stuff, good stuff. Not a lot of gateways, not a lot of gateways. Really, actually, an extraordinarily low gateway count. And here comes the kind of uh-oh moment. In every single case where Protoss players doing this big Colossus gateway mix, they want to be able to do some direct pushes. When did this push happen? When did this push happen? When did this push happen? A lot of you are going 15 minutes because you looked at the timer in the bottom left, and I would say not wrong. It's not wrong, but it's not right. I want it to be right. Oh, here's when it happened. When Zhou stopped putting pressure on him. Ta-da! Right, okay. Again, the instant Zhou just sort of said, nah, I'm not going to abuse my mobility anymore. I mean, here's a medevac coming down here, but it has exactly a about-to-die Marine in it. So that's not nearly as effective. We're still starting to see, oh, hey, it looks like Duckload's getting that Twilight Council. He's going for, again, that same look of eventually Zealots with leg speed and that +1 attack upgrade. But Zhou is now in this slightly uncomfortable spot. He is in a direct confrontation with this army, and this is actually something you kind of want to avoid until you're at a big advantage. We see all the SCVs coming down. A lot of Vikings trying to tear through, but man, those Colossi are doing great amounts of damage. SCV count is rapidly diminishing, and it looks like Zhou, whoa, is barely gonna hold this off. If this medevac was full, all the probes would be dead. Or if there was another medevac here with Hellions, all the probes would be dead. And we see that in a very close fight, Duckload ends up having to pull out. We have a few little fat Vikings making their way down. But here, we're going to continue to see some good aggression. Look at Zhou. It was actually pretty crippled by that attack. But you know what? That's okay. That's going to be okay in the end because of the fact that we're going to see Zhou continue to abuse mobility, right? Oh, being on things along the edges. Here's a Colossi. He can end up peeling back, and he does. Just going to pick that one off a little bit. A lot of aggression coming up by Terran, landing up on the high ground again. This is another exploit of mobility, getting into these sorts of good positions. Oh, we see that other Marine from that drop has 7 kills. Hey, cool. Looks like these Marauders are now popping up, and they're just going to be pulling right back out. Anytime Zhou feels like, hey, you know what? I'm not so sure that I could win that fight. He pulls back. And now he's just doing more surgical drops all over the place. And we're seeing that White Raw, interestingly, this game is having a hard time even getting up the Zealot leg speed. Even getting up 6 gateways. Even getting up at all. That's pretty funny. I repeated that so many times. Do see that the Marauders, again, pulling back. Wow, small force, big force. Gotta pull them back. But hey, small force, and then White Raw tried to repel with a smaller force. And it's doing real well. This is a style of play that QXC does quite a lot, doing this sort of dropship harassment, but Zhou is playing it out very carefully. A lot of times you'll see QXC get a little bit overeager, but I'm excited to show you these games of Zhou because QXC has amazing micro that sort of lets him get away with some incredible feats. But Zhou is doing some pretty straightforward things. I'm not saying that Zhou is bad, but he's just dropping, and then when he sees units, he loads up and pulls back. You can do that too. You can just move the medevac to the back, see units, and pull right on back again. You can also be very careful with not suiciding units in the way that Zhou is. This is very excellent play. And again, the dropping in the back, things starting to lose power. Clearly Duckload under the gun, looking so good, as he should. More control, more dropping, good stuff. No real direct fight ever really happened in those myths. Just pulling away more and more. Very cool stuff. Now, for the record, I don't know if any of you have done this to your table, but I actually have duct tape along the edge of my table because my table's like really sharp and it like pinches, but it's just peeled up, so my hand's getting covered. You see that little bit of gray? It's duct tape gack getting on me. Ugh, I have to move my mouse pad over. Tragedy. I have to get more duct tape there. Oh, it's adhesive-y. There's one more reason, one more game that I kind of wanted to show everyone, which is a game that looks kind of silly, but highlights a lot of important things about the functionality of big Colossus plays, especially on one base, as well as how to deal with them. This is, again, Duckload versus Muslim. We're going to see, again, another sort of what play from Duckload. We're going to see a good amount of the Colossus coming up on one base. We're going to see those 3 gateways going down fast. Second gas coming up. The Muslim does something that I think is kind of cool. He gets 2 barracks fast and just doesn't get an add-on on the second one. He just begins making a lot of Mariners. There's this kind of fast factory, a kind of fast starport. We do see more gateways going down, the Robo going down. Duckload clearly doing a big one-base play. Why? Hell, we're close positions on Metalopolis. Sure, let's just give it a go. We're going to see the Muslim not do the greatest job of harassment in this game. We're not going to see a lot of dropship play. We're going to see Banshees coming out, but the Banshees are a little bit passive in this game. Notice immediately that the Muslim is playing a little bit defensively with all his units. We see the Banshee kind of beginning to poke around. And here, Duckload is getting to put down a Nexus. Now, recall, in the Delta Quadrant game, Zhou was already beginning to drop. At around 8 minutes and 30 seconds, that's when Zhou was getting ready to do his little drop thing, right? But at 9 minutes, we see Muslim not quite really investing in that at this point. We're starting to see that Colossus count getting a little higher. Look at this. This little army's moving out, kind of uncontested. So Muslim's going to move out and try to do himself a little bit of a double-pronged attack. So he ends up kind of poking in. It's having a little bit of trouble. These two little forces are very, very close, and Muslim's going to try to poke in here and do a little bit of damage, and smartly he's going to end up pulling back. But again, you want to be quite careful with your early forces like this, because these guys should have been poking at the front and picking off this pylon and then pulling all the way back. If you try to go for the jugular, you can get yourself in a lot of trouble. You can get yourself in quite a lot of trouble. And then suddenly the Banshees are not really doing damage to the back or picking these off or even picking off this robotics bay, but they're sort of participating at the front. And now Muslim is in a mad dash back to his base. And this huge Colossus force feels very intimidating. And this is exactly what I was talking about earlier, where I was like, yeah, I really think that Duckload could crush Zhou's force. We see Muslim has an even larger force than Zhou did in that last game, and it's looking pretty hairy. It's looking pretty grim. So what we've seen up to this point, because this game gives two important lessons. What we've seen up to this point is that in terms of that sort of harassment and aggression, it'll feel fragile. Because we saw Muslim, I would essentially say, make like 1.5 missteps. It would be that his Marines and Marauders were a little bit too far to the side, so they got trapped. And that his Banshees weren't quite really at the backside. It wasn't really drawing the army apart. The Marines and the Marauders and the Banshees were a little bit close together. It's kind of hard to get a good mix that can direct push that sort of Colossus force early on. So it really kind of does need to be about splitting up. But here comes the second half. Amazingly, after losing almost everything, the Muslim holds, right? He holds, no problem. He holds, no problem at all. Yeah, that's cool. How many SCVs do I have? 6. Whatever. No big deal. And then what we're going to see is perhaps the most shocking of all. Dum-dum-dum. Muslim just wanders right over to White Raw's base and kills him off, right? Just straight up kills him. Straight up kills him. And this, I think, a lot of people, especially the people who watch this happen live, were like, oh my god, the Muslim with the amazing counterattack win, boo, yeah, oh. And of course, Duckload says something which I think is Russian, but of course, because I talk to people on AOL Instant Messenger, I read that as NN for nighty-night. Oh, he got tired, you little guy got tired. So this is actually an excellent example of how fragile doing this sort of Colossus low gateway count build is. If you get low on your Colossus count, you're done. You're over. You are eliminated. That big attack, very scary. It almost won. It was so close to killing off the Muslim. But then it barely didn't, and Duckload immediately lost. That's kind of a weird sounding way to play, right? It sounds so fragile. I mean, you can do an attack, and if you're inches away from winning the game, and instead he holds it off, then he can counterattack and instantly kill you. Well, yeah, that's the way that the play works out. That is part of the reason why this abuse of mobility with drops, you don't have to use drops the way that Zhou did. You can even use Banshees. I kind of prefer the drops just because I think the Marine Marauder integrates better into a bigger army as opposed to the Banshee. And plus I think that, Banshees die kind of easy. But you're kind of seeing that in this game, wow, it's a lot more fragile than you had originally thought. So you can really peel things apart, and then your very fast Colossusing player is going to feel how vulnerable his build really is. Because he'll maybe have, sometimes a Colossus will just be off doing its own thing, and you'll drop 4 Marauders, and you can pick it. You can stim it and take it down. Cool. So I think this was a good set of games to help highlight that White Raw's play is very strong when it gets up and running and going. But before then, if you can abuse it by pulling the army apart with lots of gentle poking, abusing your mobility, and exploiting the immobility of the Colossus, that you too can be a total champion of IEM and end up taking down greats like White Raw. Oh, the inspiring speaker speaks. God, my hand is getting absolutely disgustingly sticky due to this duct tape. Ugh. Just the stickiest hands. Alright, let's take the question from Grimmy Man. I accidentally tabbed right by it, so I'm going to try to refind it again. Where are you, Grimmy Man? Where are you, Grimmy Man? Yeah, Grimmy Man. 1, 2, 3. Let's see here. Dear Day 9, we see some great timing by both Terran and Protoss in these matches. As timing, upgrades in tech units, changes a bit as the game evolves, what's a good way to gauge the timing for a push-drop harassment so that an attack is most effective? So I would like to state right off the bat that that is what makes StarCraft 2 hard. That those questions do not have clear answers. They require lots of testing and ingenuity and all that good stuff. So a lot of you are probably feeling like, oh, but Day 9, I have no future, I have no direction, help me, my compass is just spinning in circles in the woods. I would say that the important thing is not the timing. The important thing in these games, I don't want you to be thinking as much about the timing. I instead want you to be thinking about the fashion in which Zhou did these pokes. Running up, picking some off, pulling stuff back. Just most importantly, trying not to let his unit count diminish. Doing a drop just to kill a pylon and lifting up and pulling back. Just do that a lot. And you'll start feeling your opponents be really, really weak. And you'll immediately begin racking up more wins. And then as you get more and more experience, you'll start to feel things like, yeah, if I drop too early, he doesn't have enough bases up. So he only has 1 base to defend, so it's really easy. But if you wait a little bit and he has 3 bases, then it's really easy to harass because he's so spread out. Just begin doing a lot of the harassment. Let's take 2 more questions. Let's see here. Prof Squiggle says, hey Day 9, I like prodding as Terran, but I feel like a few pieces of static defense can nullify any drop. How can I keep poking without having to sacrifice dropships? Here's the trick in that statement. I feel like a few pieces of static defense can nullify drops. I feel like a few pieces of static defense can nullify drops. Perfect. If he is making lots of static defense, your drop harass is a success. When you originally do the drop harass, like what we see in this game between Zhou and White Ra, how does it feel? Oh my gosh, well, it feels like White Ra can't leave his base ever, because it feels like there's these drops moving around all the time. If White Ra got a lot of cannons, then that means that White Ra's main army is way smaller. So either he doesn't make static defense and he has to hang back and be a little more passive, or he does make the static defense. And the static defense isn't going to be moving out to attack you, so White Ra's smaller army, again, is reluctant to move out, and you can continue to take expansions in Zhou's position. If he does make a lot of static defense, you have won. It's like, for instance, if you have a really good timing for like a Marauder Hellion attack against Zerg, and you move out and you're winning, and you move out and you're winning, and you move out and you're winning, and then you move out and he makes 15 spine crawlers. And you say, but how do I break that? You don't. You expand and say, yeah, I effectively killed 15 drones since he made 15 spine crawlers. Glorious victory, right? It's great if they end up doing that sort of things. Let us divine. The Cerebrit, again, asks, what about getting the Forge and the Cannon a little sooner to deal with the drops? Again, if static defense gets built, it's a big win for Terran. That's kind of what he really wants to do. And here is the final question from Miles Tag, who says, Dear Day 9, why don't high-level Protoss players get Phoenixes mid-game to shut down Terran air control, kill their medevacs, and gain mobility themselves, such as a 2-base, 3-gate, Robo, Stargate sort of mix? It's a great question. It's something a lot of players have been experimenting around a lot with, such as EG's Oxlov. I've seen do that on multiple occasions. Who are some other ones I've seen? I know In Control was doing a little mess around-a-roo with that. The most important issue that I want to highlight to everyone of any race, it is very easy to think, well, I could add in this unit, and then I could add in this unit, and then I could get this one, and this one, and this one. And you start thinking of an army that consists of every unit for your entire race. And some of you will be like, well, I don't do that. But you'll do like halfway. You'll say, well, I'm going to get some, I'm going to originally begin with a Stalker Colossus ball. Then I'm realizing Zealots are pretty good. And then, hey, maybe Sentries are good at the Force Field. And I should probably get some Immortals in there too, so that way I can break the tanks. And of course, Phoenixes are going to be helpful against those air units. And Void Rays do a lot of damage too. And maybe some of you might not do the Void Ray. array and might not do the immortal, but you're still having a pretty varied mix of units in there. And the more varied your army is, the overall smaller it ends up being. Obvious example, if you make only Marauders, you're going to have a giant army of Marauders. Sure, you'll end up getting killed by Immortals, but damn, your army's big. If you try to go Hellion with Blue Flame, Siege Tank with Siege Mode, Marauders and Marines with Stim and Combat Shield and Concussive Shell and a Raven and Banshees, it's just so much variety it ends up weakening it. So, sure, the Phoenixes are going to help against the drops. But again, a lot of good Terran players will see the Phoenixes and just say, alright, I guess I'm just going to expand a bunch. I know your Phoenixes can't really do any damage, and I'm going to be going 10 Barracks Marine Marauder with Vikings. So when you do move out with your 130 food fourths, I'm maxed with $2,000 in the bank and I can crush it. Not saying it's bad. A lot of Protoss players have had great success with Phoenixes, had a great success with that mix, especially with the Colossus. But the big way that I see that mix lose is a Terran player who just says, fine, I guess I'm not harassing. I'm just going all out muscle. So that sort of gentle balance between getting a variety of units to defend versus still being able to put pressure on and harass, that is where all the cool strategy lies, and that is why StarCraft 2 is a very deep, brilliant game. But I want you, Terran players, to go out and start to be more mobile, to use more drops, not in a big way, but just with one little medevac constantly poking and prodding, and units at the front poking and prodding, and you will have the joy of exploiting his poor unit placement. Oh, it should be such a joy. It's going to wrap up this day's episode. Next week's Fun Day Monday is going to be a little bit of an improv special. I want you to submit constraints on the way that I speak. For instance, you can say things like, Sean, all your sentences must end with a word that rhymes with blah. And I'll be taking all these submissions that you will email to monday@day9.tv. The admins will sort out and choose 30 of them for me, unbeknownst to me at all, but of course probably getting a little bit of clearance. And then I'll be casting games, and every 5 minutes I will switch it up. So again, it's now the constraints on me instead of on you. Next week's Newbie Tuesday is going to be a prepared lesson instead of you submitting anything. So hey, kick it back, take it easy. And go to theshortyawards.com and tell everyone you know to vote for me, damn it. Vote for me, vote for me. Oh, please, 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 please vote for me. Please vote for me. Shortyawards.com, vote for me in gaming. Please vote for me in gaming. Bye, guys.